You've got all the NDs,
Yep.
plus all the other NDs are on the actual Panasonic shooting this episode. So what do I get left with?
Well, this is great because I'm going to have all the NDs to shoot properly when we're doing a time lapse, and you can be the example of if you have bad technique.
Why do I always have to be the example of bad technique? What?
YouTube's not fair, man.
Yeah, but why is it always not fair towards me? Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It's Niccolls here from DPReview, and we've got another educational how-to here for you. Today we're going to be talking about time lapses. So Jordan and I are going to teach you about how to set up time lapses in general, the accessories you need, some important techniques and tips so that you get great success making your time lapse photos or videos. I guess they really are kind of a bit of both. Now, in order to understand how time lapses work, we certainly have to understand how video works. And you can think of video as photography. It is just a series of still images, but just played very quickly in sequence. Now, what Jordan and I like to shoot for our show is often 24 frames per second, but you can think of that as 24 pictures played every second. In North America, it's very common to also do 30 frames per second. And in Europe and Asia, they often like to do 25 frames per second. But suffice to say, this is a good threshold where the brain is convinced that what we're watching is actually live video and not a series of photographs end to end. Slow motion video, I would simply shoot a lot more pictures per second, but play it back at 24 frames per second. That will slow real life way down. But when we talk about time lapses today, we're actually doing the exact opposite. Our goal is to shoot pictures over a much longer period of time. So that's where we get into the math. When we play it back at 24 frames per second, everything will go by very fast. You could see minutes or hours or even days go by in a matter of seconds. So let's get into the math and explain how we do that. Now I know I just said the word math, which means that we've just lost 20,000 viewers on this video. They've all decided to unclick after hitting the dislike button, so I'm sorry about that. But for the rest of you who decided to still stick around and learn this, it's really very simple and easy math. So the first part we're going to talk about is just how much actual video do you want to have that you can then show people at home. For Jordan and I, we tend to look around the 10-second mark for most time lapses, but sometimes you just want 3 seconds, sometimes you want 15 seconds. That's totally up to you. And so this is how we work it out. Now, I'm going to use the real world example because I'm shooting right now a time lapse of the river here down below. Now, the first thing we want to worry about is this. I've got 360 shots in total. If I then choose to play that back at 24 frames per second in this video, that's going to equal about 15 seconds of total video usage. Now, again, remember, I don't have to use the whole 15 seconds. I can cut out 4 seconds that I like or 8 seconds that I like, but that is my total video time. So really, it's as simple as working out how much time do you want, take the total amount of photos that you're gonna take, divide it by your frame rate, that's gonna be the time of video that you have to play with. Okay, so that first part's not too difficult. Let's go into the second part. And this doesn't have to be hard either. We really just now want to figure out how much real time do we want to have pass to play back in that 8 or 10 or 15 seconds that we've chosen. Well, we could do time lapses that span half an hour. We could do time lapses that span a day. We could even do time lapses that span months or years. It has been done. And so really what it all comes down to is this. How many total pictures I'm going to take? And then how much of an interval in between each photo do I need to span that entire amount of real time? I'm shooting here 360 pictures. I have set the camera to take a picture every 5 seconds. Now, if we do the math, I'm simply going to go 360 pictures times 5 seconds, and that gives me 1,800 seconds. Now, what I like to do is take 1,800 seconds and divide that by 60 seconds just so I can work with minutes. That just seems to make more sense in my head. That would, of course, give us half an hour. Now, if I simply want to cover more real time, all I do is increase the intervals in between the shots. So, for example, if I shoot 360 photos, but I do it every 10 seconds instead of every 5 seconds, that's simply going to double the length of time. Instead of a half an hour being captured, I'll capture an entire hour. And I could just increase the interval further and further to expand and capture more real time going by. It's that simple. Okay, so as you can see, we got these hard shadows because now we're doing a time lapse right into the sun, and I like the contrast that I'm getting with the shade from the bridge. but it is a lot of contrast. And you know, normally when you make time lapses, you can use JPEGs, they work just fine, but for this, I'm actually shooting RAWs because it gives me that extra ability to bring up the shadows afterwards, bring down the highlights, and control that contrast better. And of course, I can build a time lapse out of that. I'm shooting on the Niccolls Z7 here, and I'm shooting it at the full 45 megapixels, and that might seem excessive, but let's just talk about that. Standard HD video is usually roughly around 2 megapixels per frame, and 4K video is roughly over just 8 megapixels per frame. It's not a lot of resolution, but why would I then choose to shoot 24 megapixels or 45 megapixels on this camera? Well, it gives you that space to crop like you normally would. So I can choose a different frame if I want, I can move over to the right, move over to the left, or just crop in on something that I find is more interesting, or clean up my composition like I would with any photograph. Having the extra resolution there means that I've got a lot of space to do that. Now, theoretically, you can make a time lapse with any camera on the planet that can pretty much just take photos, but you need some way to set those regular intervals. You're not going to do it yourself with a stopwatch, that's for sure. So, you know, if cameras have a built-in intervalometer feature, that is very beneficial to have. And this is why Jordan and I always complain when a lot of new cameras are coming out that don't have an intervalometer feature built into them. It's really a handy tool. But if you don't, you can buy external intervalometers that plug into the remote cable releases and let you actually set up your time lapses that way. But we like cameras that have it built in. Now, take for example this Nikon Z7. This camera can do both intervalometers, or instead it can immediately just do the math and build a video for you. That's okay, but I prefer to have both. The Panasonic GH5 is great that way. I have an intervalometer, it'll take all of my stills, put them in a folder, but I can also have it build a movie file after the fact so I can watch it and see what happened right there as I took the photo. That's really handy because time lapses can be tricky to pre-visualize, and you never know what's going to happen in that half hour, hour, so I like being able to play it back at the end of that and say, oh yeah, that worked out great, or that didn't work out so well. Okay, so our cameras are clicking away doing our half-hour time lapse there, and this gives us some time to talk about how we expose these things in the first place. So when it comes to aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, you basically treat it like you would any regular photograph, although shutter speed is an exception. A lot of phones, a lot of automatic programs, or a lot of people just starting out are going to shoot their time lapses with relatively fast shutter speeds, especially on a bright day like today. And when you watch all these things play back in video, so to speak, it's going to be very jumpy and very frenetic. Now, if you like that creatively, by all means go for it. But what Jordan's doing instead is using a lot of strong ND filters to cut that light and force a slow shutter speed. In fact, he's shooting 2-second exposures right now. What this is going to do is give you a natural sense of blur and motion, and in most cases, it's a way better look. Now, I know what you really want to see for the rest of the video is more parking lots and ugly roads in Calgary, but unfortunately, we're not going to do that for you. Instead, Jordan is going to head off to the Banff Mountain Film Festival, and he's going to do some beautiful time lapses out in the mountains. So this will be a great opportunity to see just more beautiful landscapes and some more advanced techniques.
Hey everyone, it's Jordan out at the beautiful Banff Center, and I've been shooting time lapses out here all week, and I wanted to show you some examples of those. But you can see here I'm doing some digital movement in them, so I'm just zooming in on them or panning past the image because we've got enough resolution to do that. But you can see it just looks kind of fakey, looks like a real Ken Burns kind of effect. So what I want to do is actually move the camera through the shot. So here we've got the Syrup Genie, and it's going to take a half an hour to track from one end of this sign to the other. And you can see when we play that back, we're going to reveal the background in the shot. It's going to be a lot more immersive and a more interesting time lapse. So I mean, this rig might look a little bit ridiculous, and that's been the reaction of everybody who's walking past me right now staring at it. But you know, you need something like this, because if you grab something a little bit more smaller, less expensive, like this Turns Pro, it just rotates on what's essentially an egg timer. And the big problem there is, when it's doing longer exposures in those time lapses, the camera is slightly moving during them, so you wind up blurring your footage. Dedicated time lapse stuff like this is going to move, stop, fire the camera, then move again. So you wind up with much sharper footage at the end of the day. Yeah, it's a lot more hassle, it tends to be more expensive, but if you're serious about time lapse, it's totally worth it. So setting up the shot and everything like that is pretty straightforward. Really, the most difficult part of time lapse is figuring out what you're going to do with yourself while it's clicking through. Or, you know, someone like Dale Baskin who I work
Jordan.
with at DPReview, could just stumble into your scene.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. You do a fair amount of time-lapse.
I do a lot of time-lapse as well.
Yeah.
In my case, I usually don't shoot scenes like this. I shoot Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights.
Which is kind of a different pursuit. Like some of the same techniques apply.
Some of the same techniques apply. There's some different ones as well.
Cool. So when you're composing for astro or night photography, aurora, stuff like that, what are you looking for generally?
Well, obviously you want to catch the aurora.
Yeah.
But one of the things to keep in mind about aurora is aurora looks the same anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter if you're in Canada, Alaska, or Norway. And if you just shoot up, straight up in the air, it looks the same
as everything else.
So, like anywhere else, you want to set the context. You want to get some foreground in. So even when you're shooting aurora, you want to get some context with some foreground to tell your viewer what you're looking at.
Right, so ultra wide angle kind of stuff.
Generally ultra wide angle lenses. You want to be able to get both the sky and some of the ground or some other type of feature that's on the landscape.
So ultra wides typically aren't the fastest glass, so you're looking at more specialized lenses typically.
Usually, and of course, like you're shooting here, you want an ultra wide lens, but when you're shooting aurora, you're very light limited. You want to collect every photon of light you can get, and so you need wide, but you also need fast.
Right.
So for example, a common lens people like to use is a 14 or a 16 millimeter f2.8 lens. If you can get more light, that's even better. My personal favorite is the Sigma 14 millimeter f1.8.
Well, and you got to make sure that you've got faster durations. You might be like, well, I'll just do a 6-second exposure, but the aurora is going to be zipping around way too fast. It won't have that kind of natural smoothness to it.
Absolutely, and the thing that so often gets lost in aurora time lapses is the motion of the aurora. Right. We see these colors blurring together, but if you see it in person, it's very often dancing around the sky very quickly.
Yeah.
So you want to get your shutter speed as short as possible to capture as much of that detail as possible.
And quick durations between them.
Yes, so if you can get your time down to maybe 2 or 3 seconds, you'll have a much more realistic time lapse of the aurora than if you're shooting 8 or 10-second exposures.
Like here, we're shooting 5-second intervals. It's very different look.
So as you know, you can use any camera to do time-lapse photography. Astrophotography or aurora photography is one case where you actually do want a specific camera. You want a camera with a larger sensor because you're generally shooting in low light conditions. You're trying to collect as much light as possible.
Yeah,
and having
like
that larger
6400 ISO kind of shots.
Absolutely, because really you want to, as we talked about, you want to be able to get your shutter speed as slow as possible to capture the detail of the aurora. And that's easier to do if you can go to those higher ISOs without having trouble.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, always good to see you again. Maybe we'll go shoot some auroras next time I'm out in Seattle.
Let's do it. The only problem is we have a lot of clouds in Seattle, Jordan. I don't know if you know about that, but...
Well, we're not doing so great ourselves. Okay, so we've gone out, we've captured some amazing time lapses, but you might be wondering how to actually put all those together into a proper video file. And there are so many different techniques and workflows and software packages for that. But I will tell you what I use. So generally I'm shooting raw with my time lapses, so I bring those into Capture One and I process them out. Just adjust the contrast and the white balance where I want it and convert those over into JPEGs. From there I bring it into Apple's compressor and convert all those JPEGs into a QuickTime movie file. I find this is a nice way to really maintain quality, and from this point I can then make all my tweaks in my video editing software, whether that's Final Cut or Adobe Premiere. Now hopefully you found this tutorial on time lapses useful, but there's so much to talk about with this. So if you liked what you saw today, let us know, and we'd love to go into some more advanced techniques, including day to night, night to day time lapses, and more advanced motion control stuff. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see that. Otherwise, don't forget, subscribe to the channel, definitely follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and we'll see you all again very soon.